To another episode of Unravelling Toxic Masculinity. This one, we're looking at the Whatever podcast, where you have the host talking about various amount of issues. You'll have him on, you'll have some other guys on, sometimes some other women. Sometimes the women will agree with him, sometimes the women will disagree with him. And this time, the title is She Thinks Men Are Privileged. So I guess this is one of the many videos that I've had coming to my stream. So here we go. Let's see what he has to say, and we'll pause and respond as we go.
We were talking about male privilege.
Okay, we're talking about male privilege, and so I'm sure as most people like this go, they don't understand what privilege is. So we'll see what he thinks it is.
I came in with the hot take that I don't believe in.
Only female privilege exists for you.
He doesn't believe in male privilege. But again, he probably believes in a strong person privilege. Benny Loco, no, this is not the person who called.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much.
So he only believes in female privilege, not male privilege, but female privilege. So we already know that he doesn't understand what privilege is.
But no, I mean, I think when you look at privilege, and this is maybe an interesting take, I think you need to look at the totality of somebody's circumstances.
He automatically proves that he doesn't know what privilege is. Not about the individual. Just anybody watching who happens to agree with this guy, privilege is not about the individual. Privilege is about averages. On average, if you're privileged, if you're in a privileged group, you're going to have less obstacles thrown in front of you in your life than somebody who's not in that privileged group. It doesn't mean that your life individually is not going to suck. It doesn't mean that you individually are not going to be inept at going through life. You might have bad things happen to you individually, but on average, people in your group are not going to have to deal with as much adversity as people in the other group, all other things being equal.
To establish if they genuinely have privileges, because like a male, like I would argue upon birth, men, like what male privilege do men have? I mean, they have their genitals mutilated upon birth.
I mean, we could discuss, whether or not male genital mutilation or, having your foreskin removed, circumcision, is privilege or lack thereof. There's a conversation to be had there. However, there's a whole, that's a whole topic in and of itself. There are whole things we've talked about intactivists before on the podcast, and how they feel and how some of the arguments that they make are logical or not. I guess he is an intactivist. He feels that it is a violation, I guess, of somebody's body autonomy to do this when they don't have a choice in the matter. Okay, I can accept the argument, I can understand the argument that's being made about that, but I don't believe that is an issue that pertains to overall whether or not a group is privileged or not. But let's continue.
That doesn't strike me as a privilege. So
Depends.
I also don't get this one with the hat. Like, I've seen several of these videos, and this one with the hat. Let's move this. Just the hat is ridiculous. I mean, what's the deal with the hat? Come on.
Depends on so for instance, if you want to be a leader and you want to be like in politics, or you want to hold any of these high-powered leadership positions, those are usually occupied by men, and there are
a very small proportion of men. It's an apex fallacy.
It's an apex fallacy. Yeah, it's held by a small portion, but it's still being held by men. So the idea that you have high-powered men holding it doesn't mean that it's not male privilege. It's not. You're not understanding what privilege is.
Well, yeah, I understand that there isn't like every man isn't up there, but if that's what you want to do, so it depends what we're talking about. I also think there's plenty of
all other things being equal. If somebody wants to get into politics and somebody wants to get into those high leadership positions, you're going to have a much better chance of getting into that high leadership position, getting into that elected position if you're a guy than if you're not a guy. That's what male privilege means. It doesn't mean that all men are going to be able to get there. Again, you're not going to be able to have success just because you're a man, but you're going to be more likely to get it because you're a man. That's the difference. That's what these people don't understand. Let's continue.
of areas where men are falling behind or men are struggling.
Sure.
But it goes both ways. So there, for instance, you talk about it all the time. Men can be more promiscuous. That's a double standard, and women get shamed for it. Women sex workers get shamed more than male sex workers. I mean, pick your issue, and it can go one way or the other. And we all have privilege. All of us that are sitting here, all of you that are watching, that have internet, that have food, you guys all have privilege. Privileges can come in so many forms.
Well, that's intersectionality, and I don't think this dude is anywhere near ready to discuss intersectionality. But yes, there is class privilege, there is race privilege, there is gender privilege, there is cis privilege, there is religious privilege, there is body size, but there's all sorts of privilege that we can get into, and that's what intersectionality goes into. We're just talking about male versus, non-male privilege, but he ain't ready for that.
But go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think you guys are both right where there's no
I think you're both right.
such thing as being able to look at someone, their immutable characteristics, and say, I know you have more or less privilege than me. It really depends on the situation. In some circumstances, it might be more beneficial to be a female or a male. But I would say if we're talking just in terms of the legal system purely, I would say that females tend to have more privileges because of things like you just mentioned, diversity hiring when it comes to being a pilot. I can't think of, any law that currently exists where it's like, oh, you're a man, you're more likely to get in. We're going to put your resume to the top just because of that, where I can think of many circumstances.
I don't think there's a law in the airline industry that says that they're going to require that there be diversity hiring. The issue with the airline industry is that for such a long time, they denied people who were not men, and not white men specifically, the ability to even go and become pilots, that they're now trying to rectify that situation so that people who want to become pilots are now being able to do so not based on them being white men. So they're putting some people's application to enable them to be able to go and become pilots if they're, non-white men or if they're not men altogether. Doesn't mean that they're allowing people to become pilots who are not skilled or not trained to do so. It just means that they're enabling other people to now have the opportunity to do so. But when you enable other people to have the opportunities that only a certain class of people have, that will feel like oppression to that one group of people, I guess.
Circumstances when that does apply to being a female.
So I would agree that there should be a push, like we've pushed for women to get into STEM jobs. One of the things I'm a big proponent of is pushing men to get into more what like Reeves calls HEAL jobs: health, education, administration, literacy. That's
a great point. And I'm glad that they had this person on, because she is doing a good job of explaining. Like, for a long time, we as a society drove women away from those type of positions, and we drove men away from those because we've gendered positions. We've said, hey, if you're a particular gender, you can only do this, and if you're this other gender, you can only do that. And by pushing people to say, hey, if you show an interest in doing these sort of things, your gender is irrelevant. You should be able to go do those sort of things, and let's push you to go do those things if you show an interest in doing those things. It's a reasonable thing to do. It's a reasonable thing to say.
I agree with you that there should be a push. But the reason that hasn't been the case is because historically, for a long time, we've had a social system where men held the majority of the social, political, and economic power. So in some ways, like with education,
so she's kind of doing part of my job for me on this one, which is nice.
We are outpacing men by a lot. Yeah. So we've kind of not only narrowed the gap, we've reversed it. But it depends on the issue.
I agree with her. I was going to say an example of male privilege would be like in the flight industry initially, men were more...
They're seen as more competent. There were a lot more
men more in that industry. That's what I'm trying to say. But
right. They're seen as more competent, but that's a fallacy because that's the only people you saw doing the job. So you're only seeing these men, specifically white men, for a long time flying the planes. So that's what you're going to connect with flying planes. White man flying plane. So you're going to only see white man flying plane, you're going to think, oh, that's a pilot. So then you're going to see a woman flying a plane and be like, oh, that's weird, because we've gendered the idea of what a pilot should look like. So we need to stop gendering what a pilot should look like.
But it's also the factors that men were taking more risks to be in that industry, like initially, which is what...
I mean, there's like a whole part of the manosphere that literally constantly uses the example, like, if your plane was crashing, do you want a male pilot or a female pilot? Like, basically insinuating that female pilots are not as competent as males.
And I think
that societal stereotype is an example of male privilege. People assuming that because you're a woman, you're not as competent of a pilot as a man.
But it's male privilege a type of so-called male privilege that has only arisen because females are getting jobs that they might otherwise.
Yes, the one with the blue hair is a dummy. Yes, a literal dummy, not like a stupid person, but a literal dummy.
Not get. So it's, I see what you're saying. If you are currently a pilot, you're going to be assumed to be more competent if you're a man because you are not a diversity hire.
Right. I don't think that's the only reason. People have...
But just because somebody is a, quote, diversity hire, it doesn't mean that they're not qualified. That's the thing. Like the whole thing with Justice Brown. Like, just because President Biden wanted to hire somebody who happened to be a black woman, it doesn't mean that he wasn't going to pick somebody who also was not well qualified for the job. It just means that, for the last however many years that we've had a Supreme Court justices, we have not had a black woman in a position, so maybe it's about time that we put one there. So I'm going to go find one that's well qualified and put one there. It doesn't mean that she's not qualified just because he decided, okay, we're going to finally put one there who's well qualified, who just happens to be a black woman.
Always thought women were worse drivers, so they think if she's a bad driver on the road, then she's probably a bad driver as a pilot. I don't think it's just because everybody assumes you're a diversity hire. I think people genuinely think women can't drive or women have worse spatial reasoning.
I mean, that is true in average, though, that we have worse spatial reasoning.
Yeah, but to use an average and to stereotype an individual,
you're right, that's not the same.
Is the problem, right? So yes, on average, men maybe are more likely to be an engineer. But if I look at you and be like, she's definitely not an engineer because men on average are more likely to be an engineer, that would be a stupid way to think.
You wanted to come in?
Agree with you.
Well, I was going to say, there definitely is an underlying issue. But I think diversity hires make it worse for women in many industries, not just aviation.
Oh no, diversity hires make it worse because I don't understand diversity hires.
And then also to your point about women just naturally being worse spatial reasoners, I actually work in the cognitive geography lab at UCSB, and I can tell you that that's not entirely true. There are a lot of exceptions to that, and it's really more based on the individual for each person's spatial abilities and cognition.
I mean, that's not entirely true, like in aggregate, because that's, I guess, the psychometric testing usually shows that men tend to do better. Not that it's like every man is better than every woman.
There's actually a big overlap, I think, with that. So yeah,
there's a big intersection. So there might be outliers, but there's a big intersection. Okay, we get it. Let's go on.
Right on average, but there is a big overlap. There's more intragroup variation than intergroup variation on that.
Did you have more, or?
No, I mean, I wouldn't deny that. It's just that there are the average differences, whether it's even with IQ, right? Men and women have same average IQ, but the variation among men is greater, which is why you have more men at the tail ends, right? You have more male geniuses and you have more male, I mean, the gentlest way to say it is people who perhaps do not excel academically.
I.e. the poorly educated that Donald Trump loves.
But on average, we are the same. I could easily see that being the same with spatial intelligence.
Sorry, hold on.
Let's skip this whole. I don't need to hear their super chat.
Gotta give us some context.
Okay. Well, and you brought up this this talking point about in a catastrophic flight scenario how certain people would prefer a male pilot over a female pilot.
This is a manosphere talking point. I mean, didn't Andrew Tate famously say this? And
Andrew Tate did say it, but I think he added, I think you're omitting the other portion of that, and he said, well, there are certain things that I think women are better at than men are.
Sure,
for example, like childcare related things.
Yeah,
because that's how society has been ingrained to think. We push men into these quote male roles and we push women into these women roles, where in reality if we said, okay, both all genders can do these things equally well. If as long as they have the training to do so, then they can do these things equally well. And boom, there you go. But we continue to want to perpetuate these ideas, and Andrew Tate is not somebody that one should be wanting to be quoting or citing as a positive. Holy crap.
This is exactly my point. So I'm saying it cuts both ways. These gender stereotypes cut both ways. So
Is there a biological basis for these stereotypes?
Like I said, there may be some biological basis, but
Is there a biological basis for these stereotypes?
to believe that culture and socialization doesn't make an impact also is
You don't think there's like a innate temperament?
there may be a slight
Is there an innate temperament? Well, I mean, sure, maybe some people are innate. I don't think there's an innate temperament. I think I, for example, think that I'm a very loving dad and a good parent. Like, I don't think that my being a man affects that either way. Like, it's ridiculous.
on average, maybe yes, but
Men are better at stuff. We can pee our name in the snow. I mean, I'm sure there are women that can do that too, and those women who can do it would be much more talented. And there are women that can pee their name in the snow. They're just trans women.
there's also socialization and culture, which is why you see men and women behave differently in different cultures. So in like Western culture, we're a little more egalitarian, but if you look at the East, countries that are more in poverty, more war-stricken, those countries, there are more rigid gender roles still. So to believe that culture and socialization have no impact is just stupid, right? We're not all it's not all biological.
I don't think anybody's making that argument, though, that there's no societal impact on people.
I mean, y'all do. That's the thing. Y'all try and make the point that it's all biological, that there are biological things. That's what we're going to be going into. That's what, like, the Whatever podcast and the Andrew Tates of the world and the I forget what the other podcast is called, and the Pick Me Pearls of the world. We'll get into her in a little bit too. But like, y'all try and make it seem like, men are here and women are here, and y'all try and drive this point home that men are just superior to women and all of these things, and that's why there's this big split, and that's why we have to have these differences and these exceptions, and that's why men get, to do sleep around and women are called sluts for it, etc.
Well, when you're saying that, it's just innate that women are worse as pilots.
I didn't say that.
You're saying they said that. I'm saying that that's an example of them using gender stereotypes, and that's fueling gender equality because they're saying, I would rather have a male pilot because women are not as good.
I think she meant to say fueling gender inequality
at driving. Well, a lot of pilots, if you're a female and you're going to be a pilot, you're probably actually just as good at driving as men. You're not looking at everybody. You're looking at the women who chose to be pilots. So I don't think that's I don't have a gender preference if my plane is clashing on who's.
I have a question for you, and I know you wanted to come in. I mean, is there training as a pilot, do you get trained for stress management in like catastrophic situations?
Absolutely, you do. And as a flight instructor, part of what I'm responsible for teaching people is aeronautical decision making, learning about hazardous attitudes and how to mitigate them and how to process and manage different stressful situations. We also do lots of in-flight actual training, simulated engine failures, simulated engine fires, all kinds of different stuff. And I think the basis of saying, women are just worse pilots naturally, and I would want a male if the plane was crashing, I think that really just stems from ignorance. Like, they don't understand the aviation industry.
Shocking. Things stemming from ignorance.
This point is so standardized that everyone is taking the exact same exams, and it's very unbiased. If your skills and your knowledge isn't up to par, that's going to be called out, and that's what makes aviation overall, especially airlines, so safe at this point in time.
Look, I don't know what the truth is, but
I think this might very well be the first correct thing I've ever seen him say. I don't know what the truth is. Maybe this was I mean, I didn't watch this entire video. I just said, this looks like a good one to start with because it's starting with privilege. So maybe this wasn't a good video to start with, but this is probably one of the first true things I've ever heard this guy say, that he doesn't know what the truth is.
Couldn't you argue that
Wait, here he comes. He's going to try and play devil's advocate and Maybe. This is my guess. He's going to try and play devil's advocate to try and make the point.
In stressful situations that temperamentally, generally speaking, men do have some sort of better stress resilience.
No.
Oh, there we go. Men are better. Men are better at things, so therefore men should be these things. Therefore, people are justified in saying that they would want to have male pilots. Again, just to exemplify the point that was being made against the woman in next to the weird hat woman. Okay, even if that were true, and I'm not going to say that if it's true or not, because I don't know if that's true. I'm going to say that it's not true until given the evidence to show otherwise, because I don't believe anything that he says. But even if that were true, that's not going to mean that they're going to hire somebody who is not going to have the good reflexes, you have the ability to react to that. The woman who just spoke said that they put these people through these scenarios to test them to make sure that they can handle these things. So in a typical men way of thinking, the woman said something who was apparently an expert in her field, and he just went in one ear, one out with the other, and he just is going to just completely just ignore what she said and then come up with his own line of garbage. There you go. Let's continue.
Oh, because I think there are a ton of women, like I said, it could be
Sure,
true on average,
sure,
that are better than men in those situations. So to ever look at a person and use broad generalizations to be like, you're a woman, therefore you have this temperament, that indicates a lack of critical thinking, in my opinion.
Boom. Mic drop on that one.
That's just you being like, okay, I'm going to put you in this category, I'm going to put you in this category, I'm going to put you in this category. Especially in areas like this where there's so much overlap, it's false. Like she just said, they have a standardized test to get in. She has to do the same thing every other man has to do in order to be a pilot.
Hold on.
All right, so that's the end of this video. What do you think? Leave your comments below. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and have a good day.